Ambulance workers across England and Wales balloted to strike earlier this week. The industrial action, of course, involves pay. Ambulance workers have been offered a real terms pay cut by the Department of Health. But it's also about successive Tory cuts to the service. So what does that look like from the point of view of people who need an ambulance? Well, two audience members in this week's Question Time in Aberystwyth painted a pretty vivid picture of the state of the service.
May last year, my daughter had her first epileptic seizure.
And she was how old?
She was 3. Awful, but you do what you do. You ring 999, and the call handler was excellent. But you just got the feel that they couldn't understand why we were waiting so long. And being told, your instinct as a parent, right, okay, if it's taking long, put them in the car, take them yourself. Being told then, don't do it, because if anything happens on your head, be it. To then a few hours later being told...
A few hours later?
Hours, a fair few hours, having a phone call from the ambulance service saying, listen, we're not going to get to you, take it yourself.
A couple of weeks back, there was a RTA outside our house.
A road traffic accident?
Yeah. A young lady collapsed on the floor on the road, in the middle of the road. Now, myself, my daughter and my husband went out to her. There was only her there. She fitted and she stopped breathing. So we did CPR while I was on the phone to the emergency services. I was having direction from the emergency services telling me that there was no ambulance available, but there will be one soon.
Well, even though she'd stopped breathing?
She stopped breathing, so my husband and myself were doing CPR, and my daughter was there. It got to stage, we got to 20 minutes, and I was pleading and begging the call handler, and I was probably sounding very irrational at the time. Please come out. This lady has stopped breathing, and we're trying to save her life. In the meantime, we're in the road while cars are speeding past, by the way, so we were putting our own lives at risk. Half hour before a police car turned up. When he turned up, he got out, he took over from us so that we were aiding him, helping him. He still got the call handler taking direction of what to do to save this girl's life.
So when did an ambulance turn up?
It was a good nearly 2 hours before an ambulance turned up.
And the fact that, two people in the audience had experiences as harrowing as that. A lot of people are going to die that don't need to die this winter because our NHS is at the point of collapse. I mean, it's sort of impossible to conclude anything other than that. More and more people having these experiences, which just would be, they would seem unbelievable just a few years ago. Now this has become the norm. I feel like any one of these incidents could have been a news story, in like 2010, and now this is just the norm. This is something that thousands of people are experiencing every week. It's going to be. I mean, I'm terrified about what's going to happen this winter. I mean, although as we had a nurse on last week who said, don't be terrified of what's going to happen in the future. It's already collapsed. I mean, these are stories which I think speak to that. Just as harrowing as what people are experiencing when they need the NHS is what ambulance crews and dispatchers are having to deal with. The Guardian recently spoke to a paramedic in the north of England who told them this. So he's called Joshua, the paramedic. I've been a paramedic since 2016 and it's absolute hell doing this job currently. I genuinely believe most of the public have no idea how bad the situation is. We're being pushed beyond limits, constantly having dispatchers pleading for crews to come through. A massive part of the issue is that ambulances are just sat at hospitals for hours on end. We're going to patients who have waited for 12 to 13 hours. Ambulance crews are seeing patients die day in and day out. I think to myself, God, please don't let any of my family members need an ambulance. It's terrifying. Patient safety has fallen through the floor. Paramedics can't reach them in time. There's simply not enough staff to get to those patients. If the government wanted to do something about that, they would pay paramedics properly, and then people would see it as a good job that's rewarding and consider doing a career in it. Patient safety is directly linked to pay. People are quitting at a time where staffing is below critical. The issue is absolutely systemic across the entire NHS. Staff going off sick with burnout, stress and suicidal thoughts is endemic across the ambulance service. I feel completely burnt out currently. I've been considering calling in sick every night shift this week. I don't want to come to work because you don't know what you're going to come across. It's stress beyond stress. We're finishing hours late every shift, and the government is saying you don't deserve to be paid properly. So that was a paramedic linking the crisis, the obvious crisis in the health service, and particularly with respect to the ambulance service and the dispute which is coming up between the government, between the NHS and ambulance workers.
It's absolutely at breaking point. Some data which came from the GMB, which represents thousands of ambulance workers, is that a third of ambulance workers report that they've personally been involved in a delay which has resulted in the death of a patient. We've seen already, before the winter flu season even truly gets underway, that there have been reports of patients dying in ambulances outside of hospitals because there aren't any beds available. And the reason why there aren't beds available is because there is a staffing crisis. You've had an exodus of staff from the NHS because of real terms falling pay, and also because the conditions that they're having to work under are more stressful, less rewarding, and they're thinking to themselves, I don't think I can do this anymore. And in the past year alone, you've seen a 25% increase in nurses leaving the service. You've seen an exodus of GPs, and that's something which has been going on since 2010 onwards. And so at every level of healthcare provision, you've got a chronic problem of understaffing. And one of the things that really pisses me off is that the right are trying to co-opt many of these accounts of horrific delays or a shortage of beds and saying, oh, it's the NHS's fault. This is not an efficient system. It's because, the state is unwieldy and it's clumsy and it can't be trusted to manage properly. Well, look, the reason why there are fewer managers in the NHS is also because its budgets were cut to ribbons following the 2010 Conservative government. You've had NHS reforms like the one spearheaded by Andrew Lansley, which said, okay, well, what we're going to do is protect a certain number of clinical staff, but get rid of administration. So instead, it meant that clinical staff have got to do all that kind of work. This is the direct result of Tory mismanagement. But now what they're turning around and saying, like, oh, well, is it a bottomless pit? Does the NHS expect just more money all the time? And the simple answer, quite frankly, is yes. We've got a growing population, so you've got more people who are reliant on the NHS. We've also got an aging population, which means that you've got more people who are coming into an age, which means that they're going to have to have hospital care, particularly because we don't have an adequate elderly care system. So it means that it's hospitals and GPs who are having to pick up the strain of inadequate care provision. This is entirely a Conservative made crisis, because when you look at the waiting times, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown did an awful lot of shit stuff, but quite frankly, those waiting times weren't there. It's not a great mystery what the NHS needs. It's better pay and more fucking staff.